Mike. How you doing? I can't
I'm
welcome you.
very, very well, thank you.
So my name's Henry Coutinho Mason. As you can probably hear from my accent, I'm sitting over in London, in North London, um, and I used to run a trend and innovation agency for about 10 years. So was a writer, basically, written a couple of books on trends, futures, innovation. The latest book, my latest book, The Future Normal, I wrote with one of your friends, Mike, a guy called Rohit Bhargava, who you interviewed at South by Southwest. So it's a kind of an optimist's guide to the near future, I guess, would be a way of putting it. And the last year or so, obviously, been speaking a lot about AI, and the reason why I connected with Mike is because I've built an interactive AI creative experience that I use now in my keynotes to bring the audience in to help them share ideas, and we do it as a whole group experience, which is how we ended up being connected. But I'll let you tell some more of that story as well, Mike, because it's an
Well,
interesting.
that's crazy, isn't it? Because yeah, we're here talking about putting the humanity back into business and marketing, and obviously we have to talk about humans and technology and the relationship there. But I think it was a few months ago now, wasn't it? But doing my research, came across a really interesting new AI tool called Bordy. Very odd thing to do because it asks you to do everything you don't want to do on the internet, which is give your phone number and email over to a digital platform. But I'm here to test things. So I did it. Luckily, it didn't steal all my identity and credit. I got a phone call back, and this Australian voice had a really interesting conversation. Within a couple of minutes, it got to know me very well and asked me what problem I was trying to solve or how it could help. And I was like, I'm looking for really dynamic, interesting speakers that can come and talk to me on my show. And within seconds, it gave me two options. I was like, well, I don't want to make the choice because I don't know either of them. So would it? And it introduced me to Henry. And within, I don't know, a day, we had introduced each other on email. Within, I think, 48 hours or maybe 2 or 3 days, we jumped on a call. We realized that we had a lot in common. And unfortunately, he couldn't join us at South by, but he will be coming to one of our events because he's got this fantastic way of doing keynotes. But here he is now, and we are talking about the relationship between human and technology. So that's just people are like, oh, how effective is AI and what's its role now, or is it just hype? But we're living proof of its ability, which is still kind of weird now, isn't it, Henry?
Well, yeah, and it's a large part of what I'm talking about at the moment. So the context was this trend and innovation agency. We were a consumer trend firm, right? So we were our model, and my first book was all about how this kind of the way to anticipate the future is to and to navigate through a period of change is actually to focus on what isn't changing, which is the basic human needs and wants that are important to your customers, right? And of course, if you're a bank, that's going to be different to if you're a fashion company, if different if you're a luxury hotel, right? Um, and so when I've kind of carried that model, if you like, forward into thinking about AI, and that's I've been having a lot of traction from people at the moment because a lot of what I'm talking about is like so much of the conversation around AI is dominated by automation and efficiency, right? That's kind of like every McKinsey report and Bain report you read, and that for me feels like it's the kind of the C-suite priority, right? Is how can we save money, right? Faster, do more with less. And it just strikes me that that's really unimaginative and unambitious. And Seth Godin had a great piece that I read around the same time we met with Bordy, and that's probably what prompted me to give my phone number to this, DM someone, a bot on LinkedIn, which is how you get the conversation started as you go. And he said, if you think back, the first days of the internet, everyone thought content was going to be the killer app on the internet. When the first wave of the internet, it was Yahoo directory. And he said, of course, we now know with hindsight, it wasn't at all, right? It was human connection actually was the killer app. The social platforms are the ones that are the $1 trillion companies, right? Or, a lot of them. because that's really what people want. That the opportunity in connecting people is really infinite, right? And it's so exciting. And I think this is what I'm trying to, whether it's Bawdy and my little app, which is about unlocking human creativity, and there's so many examples, and I think that's the piece. That's a story that we have to tell, isn't it? Because if you're in, if all executives hear about is that AI is going to help them do stuff far, do the jobs they're doing today a little bit faster, then that's what we'll end up creating, and that's not an exciting world, right? And I think if you think about the opportunity to connect people better, to connect the right people, and to ultimately get us off screens and doing things, whether that's festivals like South by Southwest, or out in the cities that many of us will live in. Again, we saw the same thing happen with the internet. Suppose it came along and it was the death of distance and you can work anywhere, and of course, that's not what happened, was it? You look at tier one property prices in basically every major city in the world over the last 20 years have just gone one way, whether it's San Francisco, whether it's LA, whether it's London, all over. People want to be with people, and we can't let the technologists forget that. And that's why it's so nice to be talking to you, Mike, because you get that.
Because just talking to Isabel about robotics, she summed up a point I've been making, and lots of people I've been talking to have been making, is the biggest challenge with any company that's integrating technology is, and they bring fantastic engineers and fantastic technicians, but what they don't understand is the human experience. And that is exactly what Isabel just has done with her robotics design. Is she's put design and emotional connection at the heart of her robotic design. But just quickly going right back to what you said, the coming out of South by, we were talking to a lot of creative studios who were doing so much in film, and I thought they made a very good comment, because you're right. Right now, it is being the emphasis is on efficiency, but like you said, is their message was be careful not to use efficiency to cut costs, because actually what we should be doing is to be getting our time back to be doing more creative things and use it to connect more humanly, use it to be more creative.
And I think my view is humans are really hardwired to be very attuned to the value of something, and ultimately if something is abundant, we always devalue it, and if something is scarce, we value it, right? That's the luxury. And the parallel I would use, think back to the days of connectivity. We've been through that cycle, right? When Blackberries first came out, you were the hotshot on Wall Street, you had a Blackberry, you were constantly connected, that was the status symbol. Now, of course, connectivity is completely abundant, completely ubiquitous, and the ultimate status symbol, the ultimate power flex, is like sending someone a message and getting an out of office back saying, I'm hiking in, Scandinavia for the next month. And I think the same will happen in the digital sphere with AI. Everyone watching, I'm sure, has seen their feeds over the last 24 hours be completely overtaken by kind of studio, Ghibli animations from the OpenAI new image thing. And I think, there is this kind of paradox and tension between these two things that are happening. On the one hand, the democratization of creativity will lead to a blossoming. And I think, I draw a parallel there between YouTube. Look, the truth on YouTube, which is going to be the same with AI, the same with everything, right? You create 10x, 100x, a million x what was there before. What happens is the best gets really good, but alongside that, as I said, there's this paradox that also, like, that doesn't happen in a vacuum, and we are aware of that complete abundance of digital content, and therefore the natural craving will be to get offline and to connect with people. As AI promises to automate and flatten everything, actually the value of your human connections are going to become more and more important, because just by simple kind of math equation of the law of abundance. And so the only way to navigate through it will be through trusted human connection. And I think two things will happen, right? I think I've written about this in terms of deep fakes and synthetic media. A lot of people are very worried about the kind of the political deep fakes, right? Like what happens, and there are definitely areas of the world where that is higher risk, right? Where perhaps the media ecosystem is less mature. But I think so it's fascinating to me that actually, think about the US and the European elections. It hasn't been seismic, right? What I'm suspect will be more corrosive because those are so easily debunked, right? If someone posts, whatever, and look, there's some horrific stuff happening. If you're a female celebrity, undoubtedly you've had deep fake pornography generated of you, which is kind of, unconscionable. But I guess as I said, it's either easily debunked or it's a crime, right? We need to prosecute it as such. Where I think it's going to be almost more corrosive is in the kind of what I've called invisible deep fakes, the stuff where it's people just bending the truth. So, for example, for me, right, if I speak in an event, what if I just made the audience look a little bit bigger and posted the photo, right? So instead of speaking to 200 people, I made it look like I was speaking to 1,000 people, right? It's that kind of like, it's not a big enough misrepresentation to be outright false, and I think there will be a lot of people who will do that. Sadly, I mean, look at the kind of influencer model, and we've already seen it happen, right, with people buying followers on Instagram, right? And filters. I mean, what's a filter if it's not a kind of slight bending of reality to put a gloss on it?
Well, it's pure. That's pure. Sorry to interrupt, but that's just pure editing, isn't it? That's been going on for since time began.
But of course, you used to have a level of technical competence to do it, right? To use
Yeah,
Photoshop
yeah.
to do that, and now, of course, you don't, right? Now, the interesting thing is the implication of that.
I think you call yourself the reluctant futurist off the back of that.
And I always say, look, the truth is, and I think Ethan Mollick said this as well about AI. He said, look, even if the pace of AI just stopped tomorrow, like and would froze in time, it would probably take us another decade to even scratch the surface of applying what we have today. Um, into organizations, right? I mean, look at digital transformation, right? I mean, it's been going on for 20 plus years, and there's still, companies like Accenture doing billions of dollars of helping, and there's still whole swathes of the economy that barely scratching the surface, right? So I think this perpetual uh, sense that you need to be on the cutting edge is like kind of a complete myth peddled by the trend and futures and innovation agencies and people like myself. So that's a bit that kind of part of why I call myself a reluctant futurist is you just don't need to worry like that much about missing stuff. Getting it right is far more important, and by that I mean deeply integrating it into a use case that your customers actually care. Whereas, for me, it's much more interesting to think about how we can use some of the tools that we have at our disposal today to do things we've always wanted to do in new ways, and bring it back to how we opened. Us meeting via a kind of on some level a very AI, creative novel thing. We had this call with an AI and it matched us. But then it was also just done via a kind of a double opt-in email intro, right, which has been around for 20 years. So I kind of described it broadly to someone the other day as it's like Spotify Discover Weekly, but for people, right? It's kind of like the mixtape concept is nothing new, and the idea of getting mixtapes like people have been doing that forever, using technology to make a mixtape that's as good as your best friend would have given you or your partner might have made for you. That was the kind of, it's that bridging and the connection of stuff we've always wanted with the technological capability to do it in a new way. And that is, I mean, is it a trend? Yeah, a personalization trend. It's the context which is interesting, right? And that's why I love what I do, because it's telling stories about an innovation which exists over here and trying to tell those stories in a way that someone sitting in a different context goes, oh yeah, that could be useful for me. And that's not a trend really. It's just an opportunity, right? It's just an opportunity that's opened up. And that's fun because that's a creative conversation. Trends are very deterministic and sort of kind of boring, I think.
Collaboration, quick, last one, connection in 3 words.
Oh wow! I mean, Rohit has got to be up there. He's just such an incredible person to work with.
Great, cool.